I'm going to be talking about the music in the slasher genre. One of the most important aspects of any horror movie is the music, as the music in horror films are used to increase fear levels and tension. The horror would decrease dramatically, if not disappear, without the music. Just imagine the shower scene in Psycho without the shrieking violins or the thunderous music in Jaws. Approach is gone. You wouldn't have the same effect, would you? It would completely dull the fear factor for the audience. As with most elements in the horror genre, especially the slasher genre, the importance of music emerged with Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. The shower scene music is fundamental in the evolution of music, in the horror genre, anyway. The violin in the scene is so effective because it used a percussion, suggesting knife strokes. From Psycho onwards, horror movies in Hollywood started to pay attention to the sound effects more and more.
The audience would expect. Different genres attract different audiences. Different films will attract different ages, races and cultures. And each genre's audience will hold expectations for their genre. Slasher movies are a subgenre of horror. The audiences will expect generally high levels of violence involving a lot of blood, and most genres have a binary opposite, with the protagonist being a group of teenagers and the antagonist the killer. Friday the 13th, Danny Steinman, 1985, is a good example of this, and showing the narrative structure of the contemporary slasher film, with the killer with a mysterious identity who attacks the group of young teenagers. The first box office success was John Carpenter's Halloween, 1978. The film cost only $300,000 to create and made roughly $50 million. And films like this persuade Hollywood to continue creating them, which is where the slasher film was made.
Right, I'm going to talk about narrative structure. Slasher films rarely stray from Todorov's structure of narrative, and a classic film that demonstrates this is John Carpenter's Halloween from 1978. For example, this starts with a state of equilibrium, where the couple of teenagers are just being normal, and then there's a disruption to the equilibrium, where a killer begins to stalk them. This disruption is then noticed when the girl is murdered, but then things attempt to get back to normal when the killer is sent to sort of mental asylum, but then he breaks out. The equilibrium then is reinstated with either the killer is killed or then the final teenager is killed.
I'm going to talk about the false scare in slasher genres, which is a common convention in many slashers. Slasher movies are fun because so much of their energy levels involves lulling their audiences into a sense of calm and safety, and then unleashing a jolt or a stinger. These jolts then alternate with the murders, and consequently the audience is kept on edge, leaping out of its seat and not knowing which comes next, a false scare or a death. One of the most common jolts is the cat jump. This involves a hissing or a meowing cat leaping suddenly into frame and startling the character. Usually the final girl, for example in Halloween 2, 1981 and Halloween in 1989, both of these feature this. Another popular false scare involves the backwards walk or the reverse jump. In real life, you may not commonly see people going in reverse, but it is a common mode of transit in the slasher films. Characters creep backwards and then jump into someone and scream. Usually they're just backing into a friend and everybody starts to laugh. The false scare is a practical joke in which not very nice friend pulls a nasty prank on the final girl, but this is alright at the end. Since 1980s film chart the gulf between fact and fiction, real and fantasy, the practical joke is a crucial situation. In some cases, the practical joke is also the precipitating transgestion. This was all from the source of the horror films in the 1980s, the book by John Kenneth Meyer. Hi there. I'm going to talk about the distribution companies, but first I'd like to just mention about how the digitalisation has changed the way the distribution industries operates now. Because of how hard drives and computers can hold films instead of paying thousands, it simply can be done just for free. And this way, indie companies or even new filmmakers like us can stand a chance against the big-time distribution companies. This is because most films now are distributed digitally either by social networking or other sites on the internet. Now I'm going to talk about indies and studios, distribution companies. Now, for example, 20th Century Fox and Warner Brothers would be the high-end budget films, which is the studio and distribution companies, and they have the more money to spend on casting like famous stars and the filming equipment, where indie companies such as Optimum Releasing will be under a tighter budget and won't often have a Hollywood star and would normally have an actor that was star of the very first time in their movies. An example of this is Wes Craven's original Nightmare on Elm Street in 1984, where Johnny Depp starred for the first time, and this was by an indie company, New Line Cinema. Whereas when he starred in the first Pirates of the Caribbean, it was by a studio company, Walt Disney, with a high budget, because by this time he was well known for his acting and he was a big actor in Hollywood. Now I'm going to talk about The Final Girl. The Final Girl is a thriller and horror film tradition that specially refers to the last woman or girl alive to confront the killer, and sometimes the one left to tell the story. The term was created by Carol J. Clover in her book Men, Women and Chainsaws, Gender in the Modern Horror Film. Clover suggests that in these films, the viewer begins by sharing the perspective of the killer, but experiences a shift in identification to the final girl partway through the film. The Final Girl has been observed in dozens of films, including Halloween, Friday the 13th, A Nightmare on Elm Street, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Alien and Scream.
Shots. The amount of shot variety in a slasher film has increased through the years of genre, being highly shown and being popular genre. The pace of fast editing to create more suspense and no long takes gives the slasher films a better effect of scaring the audience or showing an intense killing scene when you follow the killer's point of view to the victim's point of view. However, the old slasher films, such as Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, shows more signs of shot variety, for example, the famous shower scene. This developed so much into films as Nightmare on Elm Street, a remake in 2010 by Samuel Bayer. It also shows through from the dreams to real life. This also contributes to the verisimilitude, making it more realistic.
Go insecure, don't know what for. Go insecure, don't know what for. Go insecure, don't know what for.